Making of the Constitution. It was in 1934 that the idea of Constituent Assembly for India was put forward for the first time by M.N. Roy, a pioneer of the communist movement in India and an advocate of radical democratism. In 1935, in the Indian National Congress, for the first time, officially demanded the Constituent Assembly to frame Constitution of India. In 1938, J.L. Nehru, on the behalf of INC, declared that the Constitution of Free India must be framed without outside interference by a Constituent Assembly elected on the basis of adult franchise. The demand was finally accepted in principle by the British government in what is known as the August Offer of 1940. In 1942, Sir Stafford Cripps, a member of the cabinet, came to India with the draft proposal for the British government on the framing of the independent constitution to be adopted after the World War II. The Cripps proposal was rejected by the Muslim League, which wanted India to be divided into two autonomous states with two separate constituent assemblies. Finally, the cabinet mission was sent to India. While it rejected the idea of two constituent assemblies, it put forth a scheme for the constituent assembly which more or less satisfy the Muslim League. So the cabinet mission consists of three members: Lord Pethick Lawrence, Sir Stafford Cripps, and the A.V. Alexander. They arrived in India on 24 March 1946. The cabinet mission published its plan on May 16, 1946. So composition of the Indian so composition of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly was constituted in November 1946 under the scheme formulated by the Cabinet Mission Plan. The features of the scheme were: first, the total strength of the Constituent Assembly was to be 389. Out of these, 296 seats were to be allotted to British India and 93 seats to princely states. Out of 296 seats allotted to the British India, 292 members were to be drawn from the 11 governors' provinces and 4 from the 4 chief commissioners' provinces, 1 from each. Second, each province and princely state or group of states, in case of small states, were to be allotted seats in proportion to their respective population. Roughly, one seat was to be allotted for every million population. Third, seats allotted to each British province were to be decided among the three principal communities: Muslim, Sikhs, and general, all except Muslims and Sikhs in proportion to their population. The representatives of each community were to be elected by members of that community in the provincial legislative assembly, and voting was to be by the method of proportional representation by means of single transferable vote. Fifth point, the representatives of princely states were to be nominated by the heads of the princely states. It is thus clear that the Constituent Assembly was to be partly elected and partly nominated body. Moreover, the members were to be indirectly elected by the members of the provincial assemblies, who themselves were elected on a limited franchise. The Government of India Act of 1935 granted franchise on the basis of tax, property, and education. So the elections to the Constituent Assembly for 296 seats allotted to the British Indian provinces were held in July-August 1946. The Indian National Congress won 208 seats, the Muslim League 73 seats, and the small groups and independents got the remaining 15 seats. However, the 93 seats allotted to the princely states were not filled, as they decided to stay away from the Constituent Assembly. Although the Constituent Assembly was not directly elected by the people of India on the basis of the adult franchise, the assembly comprised representatives of all the sections of the Indian society: Hindu, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, Anglo Indians, Indian Christians, SCs, STs, including women of all these sections. The assembly included all important personalities of the India at that time, with the exception of Mahatma Gandhi and M.A. Jinnah. Working of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly held its first meeting on December 9, 1946. The Muslim League boycotted the meeting and insisted on a separate state for Pakistan. The meeting was thus attended by only 211 members. Dr. Sachidanand Sinha, the oldest member, was elected as the temporary president of the assembly following the French practice. Later on, December 11, 1946, Dr. Rajendra Prasad and H.C. Mukherjee were elected as the president and vice presidents of the assembly respectively. Sir B.N. Rao was appointed as the constitutional advisor to the assembly. So, on third objective revolution, on December 13, 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru moved the historic objective resolution in the assembly. It laid down the fundamentals and philosophy of the constitutional structure. This resolution was unanimously adopted by the assembly on January 22, 1947. It influenced the eventual shaping of the constitution through all its subsequent changes. Its modified version forms the preamble of the present constitution. Changes by the Independence Act. The representatives of the princely states who had strayed away from the Constituent Assembly gradually joined it. On April 28, 1947, representatives of 6 states were part of the assembly. After the acceptance of the Mountbatten Plan of June 3, 1947, for a partition of the country, the representatives of most of the other princely states took their seats in the assembly. The members of the Muslim League from the Indian Dominion also entered the assembly. The Independence Act of 1947 made the following 3 changes in the position of the assembly. First, the assembly was made a fully sovereign body which could frame any constitution it pleased. The act empowered the assembly to abrogate or alter any law made by the parliament, any law made by the British Parliament in relation to India. Second, the assembly also became a legislative body. In other words, 2 separate functions were assigned to the assembly, that is, making of a constitution for free India and enacting of ordinary laws for the country. These 2 tasks were to be performed on separate days. Thus, the assembly became the first parliament of the free India, that is, Dominion legislature. Whenever the assembly met as the constituent body, it was chaired by Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and when it met as the legislative body, it was chaired by G.V. Malvankar. So for the first time, the Constituent Assembly met as the Dominion Legislative on November 17, 1947, and elected G.V. Mavlankar as its Speaker. November 17, 1947. Third point. So these 2 functions continued till November 26, 1949, when the task of making the constitution was over. Third point. The Muslim League members hailing from the areas included in the Pakistan. So these areas include West Punjab, East Bengal, Northwestern Front Province, Sindh, Balochistan, and Sylhet district of Assam. A separate constituent assembly was set up for the Pakistan. So third point says the Muslim League members hailing from the areas included in the Pakistan withdrew from the Constituent Assembly for India. Consequently, the total strength of the assembly came down to 299 as against 389 originally fixed in the 1949 under the Cabinet Mission Plan. The strength of the Union provinces, that is formerly British provinces, was reduced from 296 to 229, and those of the princely states from 93 to 70. The state-wise membership of the assembly as on December 31, 1947 is shown in the table 2.1. Other functions performed. In addition to the making of the constitution, enacting of ordinary laws, the Constituent Assembly also performed the following functions. It ratified the India's membership of the Commonwealth in May 1949. It adopted the national flag on July 22, 1947. That is before the independence. It adopted the national anthem on January 24, 1950. It adopted the national song on January 24, 1950. It elected Rajendra Prasad as the first president of the India on January 24, 1950. In all, the Constituent Assembly had 11 sessions over 2 years, 11 months and 18 days. The constitution makers had gone through the constitution of about 60 countries, and the draft constitution was considered for 114 days. The total expenditure incurred on making the constitution amounted to Rs 64 lakh at that time. On January 24, 1950, the Constituent Assembly held its final session. It, however, did not end and continued as the Provisional Parliament of India from January 26, 1950 till the formation of the new parliament after the first general elections in 1951-52. Committees of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly appointed a number of committees to deal with different tasks of constitution making. Out of these, 8 were major committees and the others were the minor committees. The names of these committees and their chairmen are given below. Major committees. First, the Union Powers Committee, Jawaharlal Nehru. The Union Constitution Committee, Jawaharlal Nehru. Provincial Constitution Committee, Sardar Patel. Drafting Committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights, Minorities and Tribal and Excluded Areas. Sardar Patel. This committee had the following subcommittees: Fundamental Rights Subcommittee J.B. Kriplani, Minority Subcommittee S.C. Mukherjee, Northeast Frontier Tribal Areas and Assam Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas Subcommittees Gopinath Bardoloi, Excluded and Partially Excluded Areas other than those in Assam Subcommittee A.V. Thakkar. Rules of Procedure Committee Dr. Rajendra Prasad. States Committee Committee for Negotiating with the States under J.L. Nehru and Steering Committee Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Minor Committees Committee on the Functions of the Constituent Assembly G.V. Mavlankar. Order of Business Committee K.M. Munshi. House Committee B. Pattabi Sitaramaiah. Ad hoc Committee on the National Flag Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Special Committee to examine the draft Constitution Aladi Krishna Swamy Iyer. Credentials Committee Aladi Krishna Swamy Iyer. Finance and Staff Committee Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Okay. Committee to examine 11th point. Committee to examine the effect of Indian Independence Act of 1947. Hindi Translation Committee, Urdu Translation Committee, Press Gallery Committee. 12th point. Committee on Chief Commissioners Provinces B. Pattabi Sitaramaiah. Commission on Linguistic Provinces. Expert Committee on Financial Provisions. Ad hoc Committee on the Supreme Court S. Varada Charyar. Drafting Committee. Among all the committees of the Constituent Assembly, the most important committee was the Drafting Committee set up on August 29, 1947, that is 14 days after the independence. It was this committee that was entrusted with the task of preparing a draft of the new constitution. It consisted of 7 members. They were Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as chairman, N. Gopala Swamy Iyengar, Aladi Krishna Swamy Iyer, Dr. K.M. Munshi, Syed Muhammad Saadullah, N. Madhava Rao. N. Madhava Rao replaced B.L. Mittal, who resigned due to ill health, and the 7th member was T.T. Krishnamachari. He replaced D.P. Khaitan, who died in 1948. The drafting committee, after taking into consideration the proposals of the various committees, prepared the first draft of the Constitution of India, which was published in February 1948. The people of India were given 8 months to discuss the draft and propose amendments. In the light of the public comments, criticism and suggestions, the drafting committee prepared a second draft, which was published in October 1948. The drafting committee took less than 6 months to prepare its draft. In all, it sat only for 141 days. So, enactment of the Constitution. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar introduced the final draft of the Constitution in the Assembly on November 4, 1948, then held the first reading. The Assembly had a general discussion on it for 5 days till 9 November 1948. The second reading, clause by clause consideration, started on November 15, 1948 and ended on October 17, 1949. During this stage, as many as 7,653 amendments were proposed and 2,473 were actually discussed in the Assembly. The third reading of the draft started in the November 14, 1949. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar moved a motion. The Constitution, as settled by the Assembly, be passed. The motion on draft Constitution was declared as passed on November 26, 1949 and received the signature of the members of the President. Out of total 299 members of the Assembly, only 284 were actually present on that day and signed the Constitution. This is also the date mentioned in the preamble as the date on which the people of India in Constituent Assembly adopted, enacted and gave to themselves this Constitution. The Constitution as adopted on November 26, 1945 contained a preamble, 395 articles and 8 schedules. The preamble was enacted after the entire Constitution was already enacted. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the then Law Minister, piloted the draft Constitution in the Assembly. He took a very prominent part in the deliberations of the Assembly. He was known for his logical, forceful and persuasive arguments on the floor of the Assembly. He is recognized as the father of the Constitution of India. This brilliant writer, constitutional expert, undisputed leader of the scheduled castes and the chief architect of the Constitution of India is also known as the modern Manu. Enforcement of the Constitution. Some provisions of the Constitution pertaining to the citizenship, elections, provisional parliament, temporary and transitional provisions and short title contained in the Article 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 60, 324, 366, 367, 379, 380 388, 391, 392, 393 came into force on the November 26, 1949 itself. The remaining provisions, the major part of the Constitution, came into force on January 26, 1950. This day is referred to the Constitution as the date of its commencement and celebrated as the Republic Day. January 26 was specifically chosen as the date of commencement of the Constitution because of its historical importance. It was on this day in 1930 that Purna Swaraj Day was celebrated following the resolution of Lahore Session December 1929 of the INC. With the commencement of the Constitution, the Indian Independence Act of 1947 and the Government of India Act of 1935, with all enactments amending or supplementing the latter act, were repealed. The abolition of Privy Council Jurisdiction Act 1947 was, however, continued. Criticism of the Constituent Assembly, not a representative body, that is, members were not directly elected by the people of India on the basis of the universal adult franchise. Second, not a sovereign body, as it was created by the proposals of the British cabinet. Further, they said that the assembly held its session with the permission of the British government. Third, time consuming. Fourth, dominated by Congress. Granville Austin, a British constitutional expert, remarked, the Constitutional Assembly was a one-party body in an essentially one-party country. The Assembly was Congress and the Congress was India. Fifth, the loyal politician domination. Sixth, they dominated by Hindus. Note, the Assembly met once again in January 24, 1950 when they appended their signatures to the Constitution of India.